Hello and welcome everybody, this is Grandmaster Sam Shankland, and today I would like to continue my series on the Caro Kann. So last time we went into sort of the old main line, which was knight c3, and we looked at some of the ideas there. I mean, it didn't cover absolutely everything, but it should give a pretty good sense of how to play those positions and what the main opening theory is about. So today I'd like to go into what I believe is sort of the most important line of today, which is the advanced variation, which is e4, c6, d4, d5, and white plays e5, which takes a lot of space in the center and is trying to take the space and not let black get any counterplay for it. So this is somewhat similar to the advanced French, but there's two main differences. One, black's a little bit behind on development compared to the advanced French, where he's often a little bit ahead. And two, which is what we're going to try to bank on, is this bishop on c8 is not going to be blocked in by the pawn on e6. So there's two main moves here, bishop f5 and c5. c5 is interesting for sure, and black's results have been adequate here, but I don't entirely trust it. It looks very risky to me. Opening the center, it's before black might be ready. In any case, I'm not sure. I don't really recommend this move. Although I also don't have any prescribed refutation for any player playing white. That's your own job. But I'm going to recommend bishop f5, which is sort of a more positional move. And here I think white has played, I think like at levels over 2,400 FIDE, white's played 13 different moves in this position. Maybe that's too, or maybe it was just 11. White has played a lot of moves here. He's played c4, he's played a3, he's played b3, he's played bishop d3, bishop e2, knight f3, knight e2, g4, h4, knight c3, knight d2, f4. He's played every single move under the sun. To cover every single one of these would take years, so we're not going to. But I'm sort of going to show you a little bit about how to approach the positions before we get into the moves that I think we do have to cover. So, first of all, the bishop exchange with bishop d3 happens in some lines with or without f4. Here I think there's a key motif that black should know. Let's say white plays, f4 would sort of be in the spirit of this kind of variation, but it's not the best move. But let's say f4, or even knight f3. We'll respond the same way. I think black should play this sort of nice strategic idea, queen a5 check, and the point is after bishop d2 to play queen a6. And with this move, black is going to encourage an exchange of queens, and I think if the queens come off, white's maybe had some attacking potential on the king side, and black will be able to transform to an endgame. And if white wants to avoid a queen exchange, he's going to have to give up the right to castle. And I think this is sort of a nice motif. And then he has something after like takes, castles, knight e7. Black will play c5, knight c6. He's got a very comfortable position. He can also put the knight on f5. Black has a very comfortable endgame without any serious weaknesses. So that's sort of what to do on like the bishop d3 or on f4 e6 bishop d3. There's also been some crazy lines like there's h4, which is a legitimate move. There's g4, which is not bad, but I'm not thrilled with it. After g4, like bishop d7 has been played by Anand, and he beat Shirov in 18 moves, but it's probably a good move. I think bishop e4 is quite sufficient. And like f3, bishop g6, and I think black has no problems at all here. The white pawns on the king side aren't really doing that much. If white plays h4, just h5. And there's some on like knight e2, e6, knight f4, hg4, and this position's a little messy, but you can take my word that black's better. So that's not to worry about. White could play like I guess knight e2 here, knight e6, knight f4, but I don't believe in this. Just after c5, it looks to me like, or queen h4 probably was hurting at some point too. This doesn't look very logical on white's perspective, and I think black should be quite fine. Other moves that are just kind of random, I'm trying to think. There's like c4. c4 I don't think is too interesting, just e6, and black's fine. In any case, basically white has two ways to approach this position. One is to try to play positionally, which will involve sort of putting a clamp down on c5 and trying to like advance the kingside pawns eventually and maintain the space advantage. That's going to be the subject of our next video, and like the most accepted of these lines would be the short variation with like knight f3, e6, bishop e2. This is sort of like the most normal. But there's other lines too, like white can play bishop e3 to prevent c5, he can play knight d2 to b3. These are like the kind of moves that will sort of play like the more positional, try to prevent c5 and try to use the extra space, and I do think these are the most critical moves. But for this video, we're going to focus on sort of the aggressive moves and white trying to immediately create a mess all over the board for us to figure out what to do. So we already saw g4. Let's go to sort of its cousin with h4. Now, h4 is, it's kind of a tricky move. I mean, if black plays e6, he's losing a piece after g4. But black can respond with h5, and I think his position here is quite fine. White's been trying mainly c4 here. To be honest, I think the best move is bishop to g5. This is the most challenging. It's messy, but not so bad. Anyhow, it's very unexplored, so if any white players look into this line, I would suggest looking into bishop g5. But I also don't think we need to cover it because it's pretty similar to the rest. So let's say c4, e6, and I think black is just absolutely fine here. I don't see any problems at all. There's some interesting lines, like if white plays bishop g5 now, probably queen b6 is best, putting pressure on the b2 pawn. And black is quite happy, I think. Let's say queen d2, black should capture on c4. This is a pretty common motif to get this structure. Bishop takes c4 would not be a good move. See if you guys can figure out what black's tactic here is. Give you a second. Alright, if you want more time, pause your videos. I know this isn't really like a tactics video, but anyhow, bishop takes b1 wins the game because black's going to play bishop b4. So, more likely white would have to play a move like knight c3. And after queen b4, white is going to have a very hard time recovering this pawn. He has some compensation, of course, but realistically, if black plays knight d7, b5, knight b6, he doesn't really have much in the way of weaknesses, and I think he has every reason to look at the future with a lot of confidence. So, that's not really an issue. More common is knight c3. Now, knight d7 was the main move for a while, but I wasn't quite a believer because I thought somehow after c takes d5 it was a little more pleasant for white. I wanted knight e7. I like this move. The point is I want to meet this with knight takes d5. I think this exchange of knights will heavily favor black because I want to put the other knight on c6, and I think in general trading off more pieces will be very helpful. So this is totally fine. More common is if white tries to do something a little bit more rash. Let's say bishop g5, and now knight d7, and say like knight e2. And the point of this is white is trying to play knight g3, kick some pieces backwards, and it's a little bit hard for black to develop, but I think after a couple accurate moves, black is quite fine. So first I'd recommend d takes c4, and now knight g3. Black is not able to save the pawn with b5 because after some knight e4, well, white is completely winning because knight d6 is on the way, and we can't move the e7 knight. But just f6, immediately kicking that bishop, and say like takes, and bishop moves back, and then bishop g6, takes, and like knight d5. Black is quite fine. He'll play knight b6, queen d7, castle's long. He doesn't have any serious weaknesses, and all his pieces are on decent squares. So there's a lot of ways to reach a position kind of like this, where you got this structure where white has the isolated d-pawn and black's loosened himself on the king side, which means he'll probably have to castle long. But in general, I think these positions are totally fine. I haven't really found anything that, in my analysis, that would bother me. So this isn't really a concern. I know this line is still gaining some popularity, and I do think it's a decent try, but it's not like something to be totally worried about. I'm just trying to think of other possibilities here. I know there's some other stuff, but in any case, you sort of have the bones of it, that your goal is to get to the structure where you get some like knight f3, knight d7, and like bishop g5, Your goal is to get this kind of structure. Takes, takes, bishop e3, takes, takes, knight b6, and bishop b3, queen d7. You put your knight on d5. This is really the structure you want with a queenside castle, and I think black has every reason to look into the future with a lot of confidence. So let's go back. I don't think this is a super aggressive line for white. And let's cover one that's a little bit more aggressive, which is knight to c3, which, I mean, okay, this is sort of a burn the bridges style move because positionally speaking it makes no sense at all. Black plays e6, and if white were just to play a slow continuation, knight f3 after just c5, I mean, already white's center is coming under a lot of pressure because he'd really like to have the move c3 available. But, yeah, that's not really an issue. Really what white is going to be trying to do is play the move g4 and immediately create problems for black on the king side. But I don't think these are really an issue. So bishop g6, now sort of the trademark h4 would just be nothing after h5. Black's already better. So white will play the move knight e2. And with this move, he's hoping to play h4, h5, knight f4, and get an attack going. Now, basically with the Caro Kann, in the advanced variation, oftentimes if white can get something like this going, it can be very dangerous. So I believe that in a principled way, we should, if he wants to get a full fight with us, instead of playing one of those more positional lines, we should not shy away from it with a move like knight d7. I think here it's time to fight. And there are two moves that I would recommend here, f6 and c5, both of which are looking for a fight, and both of which I think are playable. The only move I'm going to cover in this video is c5, but f6 I do think is a decent move. So after c5, white has two main options, h4 and bishop e3. If h4, I'd recommend h5, and now knight f4, and here I would just say bishop h7. You're going to lose a pawn, it's not the end of the world, but you know, we're going to have some very good compensation. So knight takes h5, and now knight c6. There was some game, I want to say, I know Topolov was black, I want to say Shirov was white. But white's center is coming under a lot of pressure here, and it's very hard for him to hold it together. If he plays bishop b5, he plays cd, queen d4, knight e7, and now white has a couple of tries here. He can play bishop g5, but after like queen a5, I think black is quite happy. a6 is also a reasonable move. For example, takes after a takes b5, ironically, I think black's just winning. Same with bishop takes c6, knight c6. If bishop d8, knight d4, black wins. Yeah, so a6 is probably the best move after bishop g5. And after like takes, I don't know, maybe white will play like queen a4, but just queen c7, and it looks to me like black has a lot of play coming. So a sort of weird move is bishop h6, trying to use the fact that gh6 is not playable on account of knight f6 mate, but common collective defense just shows rook g8, and white's actually close to losing here. Like, for example, castle's long, a6, sorry, not a5, that would be a bad move. a6, takes, and like, already queen a4, b5 is trapping the queen, or something like that, so like he plays queen d2. And black just plays like rook c8, queen a5, and he just gives checkmate. All of his pieces work together beautifully. So, that's not a problem at all. The most critical move after knight c6 is for white to take another pawn. And here I'd recommend, again, another just burn the bridges, bishop takes c5, let him take on g7, just, you don't even care. And I think that black is totally fine. Like after takes, here, knight h5, we can play like knight takes e5, and, or actually probably even d4 is even stronger. And, I don't know, knight b5 or something, queen d5, and yeah, it was a huge initiative for black. I would not be concerned at all about him missing that one kingside pawn because he's not in any serious danger, and that he'll leave it open the h-file for his rook. All of his pieces are going to participate in the attack, and I think that white is under a lot of pressure. So I don't think that's super critical. There's some lines here where white tries to like pretend he's doing all right, but I don't believe them. You can look further into this on your own. I think I've pretty well covered that. Shown my opinion that black is doing extremely well. Much more critical is the move bishop to e3. And now again, I'm going to recommend just kind of burn the bridges style. So I would suggest knight to c6. So this move, black's trying to make problems for white immediately in the center. White will capture on c5, I believe. And now knight takes d5 is maybe possible, but it's risky. After knight d4, bishop b5 check, f4, f5 is coming very quickly. I would be a bit concerned. So I'm going to recommend actually playing h5, which is more combative. And I think black's doing quite fine here. For example, I think like knight f4, bishop h7, and white cannot capture on h5 because of d4 winning a piece. I mean, even still, actually, it's white has some play after some kind of like knight b5 to d6, but I don't think it's sufficient. I would not recommend black to win a piece here with d4. I think after knight g6, fg6, I think white has very good compensation after, say, like queen d3, probably knight e7, then knight e4, hitting knight d6. This looks very risky to me, and I would not recommend it. But I do think bishop h7, just threatening to win a pawn next move, is quite fine. And black will play h takes g4 and have a fine position. For example, bishop b5, hg4, queen g4, and just like knight h6, put the knight on f5, queen on a5, and black is doing very, very well, despite being down a pawn. So more common, I believe, is move knight d4. I think it's f4, some kind of f4 takes and knight d4. And here we get a really crazy position after knight h6, knight cb5. I'm pretty sure this is how it goes, but I might be messing up the move order. And like takes, knight d6, takes, and it's very rare in chess for you to see a position where each side has just a complete domination of one color complex, but we have that here. I mean, the dark squares completely belong to white, and the light squares completely belong to black. And these positions are rare and hard to assess, but I believe black should be all right here. The white pawn on d6 is a huge thorn in black's side, but at the same time, I don't really see a great way for white to make progress, and black can hope to create some problems with the h-file and bishop e4 coming. It's a very, very messy and complicated position, but I think, objectively speaking, black has no reason to complain. In any case, that's sort of this line, the Shirov variation, and there's a lot of complications to it, like we're seeing, but I think black's quite fine. I don't really think there's any other super aggressive moves here to organize g4. So basically, I guess since the video is a little shorter than I was expecting, I'll start to talk a little bit about the more positional lines. So essentially, if white's not going to play for checkmate, what his goal is going to be is to put a total clamp down on the move c5 and to try to eventually expand on the king side. So if I'm going to just show some moves where everything is going right for white, which is, obviously we're not going to just allow, but let's say something, I'm just going to make it so everything humanly possible goes well. So, bishop h7, g6, g3, bishop e7, and like knight d2, knight d7, a4, a6, a5, castle b4, and like rook c8, knight e1. So this is a position where everything possible has gone well for white. Basically, white is going to play f4 and h4 and h5, and he's going to expand on the king side, and black has no queenside counterplay. At this point, we are seeing that white's space advantage is going to prove to be a huge asset. Black can play f6 or something, but after f4, he's just worse. I mean, he can play f5 maybe to try to close everything down, but white has a million ways to try to make progress here. He can play c4 at some point, he can play queen b3 and prepare for c4 to open some lines. He can play for h4, h5, and then g4. You don't want any piece of this. This is exactly what we don't want to see. But what we will see is that in order to get to this position, black had to make a lot of moves that we could have potentially improved on. For example, most recently, if instead of rook c8, which did absolutely nothing, we play the move f6, already we're making a fight out of it, and I think black looks to have a very fine position. After like takes, bishop takes, and black will play e5 next, I see no reason for black to complain at all. In fact, he might even be slightly better already. His pieces will become very active very fast. So, on other moves, like a6, probably not necessary. He could maybe play a move like c5. This sort of h6, bishop h7 is definitely an idea, but after like castles, why anyone would put the knight on g6 instead of f5 is beyond me. So the point here basically is, if everything goes right for white, in the long run, black is going to be in some trouble, which is why we have to rely on some kind of counterplay or some kind of piece exchanges. If we can exchange a bunch of pieces, then the white space advantage won't be a problem. But in general, I believe that black should be fighting for counterplay with the move f6 or c5, or trying to exchange a lot of pieces. So there's a lot of ways white can approach this position, but as we'll see, in almost all of them, black is going to find ways to make counterplay, and in the ones where he's not like immediately doing something, then I don't think white's play is super dangerous. So, for example, there's a move like knight to d2. White's going to play knight to b3. His main idea with this move is prevent c5. And here so far it looks like he has prevented c5, but realistically black can play c5 anyway. And I think I covered a game Kramnik-Leko in this variation. I think c5 is a little bit risky, but it's certainly playable. Black also can play knight d7 to play for c5. Like, I know there's some line that goes like knight f3, queen c7, bishop e2, castle long, castle short, and then black plays f6. So it just shows there's a lot of other ways to fight for control of the center. Another variation is going to be bishop e3, where white's trying to immediately put a clamp down on c5, and let's say e6, c3. Here I think black does quite well to play queen b6. Queen b3, f6, f4, knight d7, and let's say like knight d2. I think black can play the move g5 here. And he's immediately trying to break down the white center that has been so proudly put together. In general, I'm saying that if white is going to play this sort of slow ideas, you want to make sure he can't like completely sit on you with his space advantage by either playing f6 or c5 to create some open lines and some counterplay. And if white plays like super aggressively with the moves like h4 and g4, I also sort of recommend a similar approach. Just don't take him at his word. Immediately fight back for the center. Because I believe in either case, white in the long run is going to have a very promising position. And that's why I think the advance is the most critical line, is because like black is dependent on having counterplay. Now, I do think in general he has enough. Like, I haven't really seen any like super convincing way to eliminate counterplay to the point that black just has an unpleasant position. But the point is, I think he needs that counterplay. And with that in mind, I think it's important for him to know what to do. And I also think it's the most critical line for white, because if he can find a way to eliminate that counterplay, strategically speaking, he will be better, which is not the case in the knight c3 main line or the Panov, where strategically speaking, the position is absolutely fine for black, and in some cases even black can be better. So in any case, that was sort of a little introduction at the end to the more positional lines. There's also the short variation with bishop e2, knight f3, but we'll cover that in our next video. So until then, this is Sam Shankland signing off.